What's going on, golf fans? It's your boy Gsluke here with our course breakdown for this week's Wyndham Championship. Gonna get you guys ready for all of your exposure with a look at Sedgefield Country Club and all the details to expect, but go hole by hole, even show you the shots that are required, as well as my custom modeling and key stats of the week that I'm using to identify my top plays. We'll also go through a few other golf courses on the PGA Tour that should play pretty similar to what we get this week, so that you can find some leaderboard crossover and you have all the tools necessary to have yourself a week. So without further ado, we've got a lot to go through here. Let's not waste any time at all and get this thing started with those course details. On paper, Sedgefield Country Club does not look like a bear, but it is a lot more strategic than you would expect. So it's a par 70, only 7,100 yards. So a lot of people might think it's a pushover, but you've got some deep rough, also a lot of trees in play at this golf course, which really complicate those matters, which will be able to give you more of an appreciation when we go hole by hole. But the agronomy would be Bermuda grass from tip to toe. You got Bermuda rough, which is sticky. You tend to get a lot of flyers out of that grass. And also the around the green shots, you get that sticky Bermuda and those real difficult clippy shots around the green. So the agronomy is a much different beast than every other week, and we haven't had pure Bermuda grass for quite some time. So a lot of players maybe aren't used to this kind of setup, and the guys that are from the area, grew up on Bermuda grass, could have a leg up this week. And you've got average sized greens, but a whole bunch of slope and undulation on them. In fact, some of the most three putts happen at this golf course compared to any others that we have on the PGA Tour. So though on paper, again, 7,000 yard course at only a par 70 doesn't look all that bad, it plays a lot more difficult than you'd expect. And it is a Donald Ross design, so almost all the greens go from sloping from back to front, which is of course something that you always see at his golf courses. And not a ton of water, but enough water in play at this golf course to make you pay attention. There's water in play on 6 of the 18 holes, and the sand hazards are hazards around this sort of golf course as well. So when you take a look at the stats, we can take a look at that at the top of the stat profile and bet the number. Fairway rate a little bit higher than usual. There's not always drivers hit at this course, so you're going to hit a few more than usual. It's worth noting though that the fairways are not wider than what we're used to seeing. In fact, they're some of the narrowest that we have on tour. So it's almost all the fact that players are laying up off the tee that is causing that to be higher than usual. Your green average is also higher than your PGA Tour average. It's usually pretty receptive at the Wyndham Championship. These averages, by the way, are from the last 3 years at this event, so it's a full 3-year sample size, 12 rounds that we're pulling from. And even when it's windy out there, you tend to hit a lot more greens than usual. But the other side of that, and where that trickiness comes in, is that you get a lot of doubles with some of the water you have in play at 6 of the 18 holes. Scrambling rate is harder than your PGA Tour average, and then even when you hit the greens at Sedgefield, you 3-putt 11.2% of the time, which is a whole 2% higher than normal. I know that doesn't seem like a drastic change, but this is one of the highest numbers that you'll see at any golf course. In fact, it's up there with Augusta National with how difficult they are to putt. Your birdie average is just a little bit higher than normal. So again, compared to the birdie fest we've had the last few weeks, that is a drastic difference. Bogey average also about your PGA Tour average. So it still plays as an average golf course, even though it's real tricky, because it's only a short par 70, right? There's only so much to a limit when it comes to that difficulty. If the weather gets nasty out there, this thing could play 1.5 to 2 strokes over par. But last year, with relatively calm conditions, it played to about a -1 average. In fact, to show you guys some of the raw averages from just last year, it played to a -1.02 average. Birdie average was 3.94 per round, and bogey or worse average was still up there, was still 2.7 per round. But it's worth noting that this bogey average from the bet the number page doesn't include all the double bogeys that you get around this course. And whether it's the greens or even that water that can trip you up in a few spots, that is about a 0.2 to 0.3 double bogey average, which is again higher than what you see at most golf courses. So you can see the fairway average, also the green average from last year towards the bottom. But keep in mind that this year of scoring was a little bit easier than most years that we see. In fact, the birdie average usually closer to like 3.8 per round. Bogey or worse average can be the 2.75 to 2.8 range. So weather dependent here in 2025, could see some movement compared to those averages. In terms of a hole-by-hole breakdown, we're going to do this rather quickly, but I just want to give you guys an appreciation for how tight it can be. Hole 1's a bit of a handshake, 400-yard par 4. Also, the tree lines are a bit further back than they are other holes on the course, so they're giving you a chance to make a birdie at one, but you still have to hit a really good wedge shot and execute a putt, because though the greens look extremely tame from the overhead views, they're much harder, as we've already talked about before. Hole 2 is 437. This is a dogleg from left to right, and this shows you where a layup is most likely going to be the prudent move. If you take a driver, it becomes almost an impossible ask to hit the short stuff, whereas if you hit an iron to the corner, you have an 80-90% fairway rate, and you're still going to have a wedge into the hole. So this is where you can see the accuracy becoming a little bit more important than the distance, which is going to be a pretty important part of our modeling later on. Next up, we have a 172-yard par 3. It is one of the larger greens on this golf course, so probably closer to 8,500, even 9,000 square foot. But because there are so many undulations on this green, it's almost like there are 2 or 3 mini greens within the massive complex that you see. Next up, we have 4, which is 424. Pretty straightforward par 4, but this is where the trees come into play, and this is more so where you can get into trouble with your accuracy. You miss in the deep stuff to the left. There's an OB if you go far enough left, but it's a chip out 99% of the time. And to the right, it's a little bit less dense. You might have a chance to run something up towards the front corner, but when you miss on this sort of hole, you're going to feel it, and that is not the case with some of the other golf courses we've played. I mean, 3M Open had the water, which made you feel it a bit more than that, but Rocket Classic, for example, you could hit it wherever and get away with it. That is not the case at Sedgefield. Next up, we have their first par 5, which is 522. It is reachable for everyone in the field, but you got to make sure you hit the short stuff. Something that we didn't note before was the incredibly high rough penalty around this course, where you can see it's a third to even a half a stroke depending on where you miss it. So, by the way, only 7 of the 14 holes would be considered driver holes around this course, and even some of your longer hitters might consider hitting less than driver here because you can still reach in 2. So, there's a little bit of room to the left and right, maybe a 5-yard buffer between the fairway and the deep stuff, but if you hit it into those treed areas, it's almost for sure going to be a layup. Hole 6 is 420, so a forced layup with the aquatic penalty area, the stream coming through the hole. So you're going to hit something less than driver, probably an iron off the tee, and then it's closer to a mid to longer iron back in. Hole 7 is 224, so this is a long, beefy par 3. Front pin locations and even left side pin locations do bring some water into play, but it's more so the distance that is the most difficult part of 7. Next up, we have 8, which is 370. This is a hole where you're probably going to take less than driver as well. If you take drivers, there's no real incentive, as a 40-50 yard chip shot might actually be harder for some of these tour pros than a 70 to 80 yard full wedge or 3/4 wedge from a little bit further back. Hole 9 is 415. This is another shorter par 4, and you can see even if you're laying back, you're leaning into the accuracy, you're at most going to have like 7 irons into these greens. So that's why accuracy is, by far the most correlated stat at this course, and also why wedges are so important as well. Next up, we have 10, so starting on the back 9, also a bit of a handshake. You can miss left because the trees aren't as dense, but to the right, that is a massive red X in your yardage book. Green is also a little bit narrower than most. It's wider to compensate for that, but still a relatively easy hole compared to the rest that you play. Next up's 11, which is 483. It's a pretty straightforward, longer par 4. I have to say the back 9 at this course is infinitely harder than the front. So if you're watching Showdown, if you're tracking your players for prop purposes, front 9's where you want them to be -2 or -3, back 9's where you're holding on. Hole 12 is 244, so the longest par 3 at this course. Another one where it's really the length that adds the difficulty than anything, which at these older historical golf courses, that's all they can really do to defend it. 13 is 398, dogleg from right to left. This is one of the easier holes on the back 9. Pitch and putt par 4, where you don't even have to take driver to get it within 100 yards. 14 is 496, another long, brutal par 4, and this is far from the last one that we've seen as well, so that's why I say the back 9 is more about holding on than scoring. A few looks that you'll have, but nothing like the front 9. Speaking of scoring looks, you do get one at 15. It is another reachable par 5, a little bit longer than the first one. It also does have water down the right side, but should be a birdie look for most of the field, and if you hit the fairway, everyone should be giving it a go in 2. 16 is 180 yards. This is a shorter par 3, at least for the standards of Wyndham in the Sedgefield Country Club. Next up, we have 17, which is a 400-yard par 4. Another scoring look on the backside, but I mean, we had like 4 or 5 of these on the front, so that's why it's so much different. And then finally, 18 is normally played as a par 5 for the members, but it will be a par 4 for the players. And it's a downhill tee shot, which makes it a little bit harder to hit the short stuff. The ball tends to stay in the air for a very long time, and it's a much much more narrow landing area than you would expect from that far back. So it's a long par 4, another one of the holes where you're just trying to hold on, and the approach shot is also back up the hill, which adds even more difficulty into this tiny green complex. So a great finishing hole, a lot of build outs that you have around 18, and what you could tell and what I really wanted to show you from the overhead views is how difficult it can be off the tee and why there's only quote unquote 7 driver holes. You can hit 3-wood, you can hit iron off the tee all that you want, but it's really that second shot where you're going to make your hay. And to focus on that second shot, we talked about the rough penalty a little bit. Look at how many are coming from 125 to 175. You're talking about 8 shots out of your 18. If you're laying up off the tee, it might even be closer to like 9 or 10 shots that you're having in that range. When we focus on the approach profile with our key stats, it's going to be a lot in that proximity bucket. Which, speaking of our key stats, let's go through our modeling now and give you an idea of exactly what I'm looking for in my plays this week. So we've got an idea of exactly how the golf course will play. Let's translate that to our DFS and betting exposure. So the first thing I always point out in my modeling would be these core 4 shots gained categories. That's where it says off the tee last 24, approach around the green, and putting last 24. Those are always going to be in my modeling regardless of golf course. So we're not really going to spend that much time on those, other than noting that form heading in is always something that you guys should have in your custom modeling. And you can mess around with the weighings a little bit, right? Mess around with which ones are the most important. I always end up doing that for these golf courses. I guess worth noting that approach play and putting are the main 2 that I'm looking for this week. But it's probably about 40 to 45% of my model, just looking at that form heading in. But on top of that, this is where we cater it towards the golf course that we're playing. You can kind of do that with, which ones you're emphasizing with those front 4. But these last 4 or 5 key stats that we're going through are really set up for Sedgefield Country Club. So the first thing we've got here is driving accuracy. And going hole by hole, you can see the importance of this stat. Keeping yourself out of the wooded areas, that rough that has the 0.3 to 0.5 shot missed fairway penalty is extremely important around this kind of track. So your David Fords, Paul Peterson, Joel Damons, Ben Coles, Aaron Rye, who's won this event before last year, all players that are going to get a significant bump this week. And, it's important to see some of our past champions, players that have had success around Sedgefield Country Club, showing up in the modeling. And I'd say it's probably the most prevalent with the driving accuracy. I mean, a lot of you probably don't even know who Jim Herman is if you're newer to the PGA DFS space. Well, he won this event 5 years ago at like 250 to 1. So you have some crazy outcomes that happen around Sedgefield, and it's normally centered around their driving accuracy. People that can just keep it in play the entire week, maybe have a spike approach week. That's how you get to the top 5, top 10. And speaking of spike approach weeks, I talked about the extra shots from 125 to 175. So if you guys want to take a look at a specific proximity bucket and narrow it down there, 125 to 175 is where I would put a lot of that emphasis. So players that are popping there would be a Coles, Kitayama, Rosner, Herman, and Hoey, all players that are playing extremely well in that bucket. You can also look at around the green on Bermuda. This is the first time in a long time that we've had that sticky Bermuda grass around the green. So players that excel on that surface, not just with their around the green form, but also historically on this type of grass, could be worth a few extra looks. Manicero really pops there. Also Benny Ann, he's always a fixture in the Florida swing, so I would have expected him to see that there. Also Andrew Novak has been very good on around the green on that Bermuda grass. And then we can also look at putting stats as well. It's Bermuda grass from tip to toe, and most people look at Bermuda putting stats when we get to this sort of agronomy. Not everyone looks at that around the green. So you probably knew to look at the Bermuda putting stats, like Jesper Svensson, Matt Fitzpatrick really popping there, Semi Valimaki, Brant Seneker, Jacob Bridgman. Ooh, speaking of good old Jake, what a Florida swing he had earlier this year, right? Let's not forget about Bridgman on a week like this. All players that are going to get a significant boost in my modeling. And then lastly, I've got par 4 scoring average on there because there's 2 extra par 4s compared to a par 72. It's the stat that I have weighed the least out of all of them this week. And now that we know the key stats to look for, let's show you a few comp courses too. So we got the FedEx St. Jude Championship. It's actually where we'll be playing next week for the first leg of the playoffs. It's another shorter par 70, also a track that has Bermuda grass from tip to toe. So a lot of the same things that we were just looking at, we're going to be taking a look at next week. So you can see not a lot of driver holes, only a 2.6 out of 10 from the driver's paradise, and also a lot of shots from 125 to 175. So it ends up working out quite well. The only flaw I'd say with looking at it is that it is a playoff event. You have all the world's best players playing. Not so much the case with the Wyndham Championship. So maybe with your elite tier players, your guys towards the top end of the pricing, it's useful, but not so much with your 6 and 7K guys that maybe haven't even played at that golf course before. And then we got the TPC Sawgrass, the home of the Players Championship. It's another stronger field event, but one that is a lot more inclusive. So you have players from this field that have teed it up there this year and in prior years before that. It's a par 72, a little bit longer too to compensate for that, but one with water all over it. And I know there's only water in play on 6 of the 18 holes this week, but all of that rough that has that 0.3 to 0.5 shot missed fairway penalty plays like a water hazard at times. So I think looking at TPC Sawgrass, a lot of a correlation has occurred between the golf courses as well. A lot of your top 5 finishers, even your winners, have had success across both venues. And in another elite tier venue where you have all these guys that are in the top 5, top 10 of the pricing up there, maybe not as useful for your scrubs, the guys that are especially newer to tour, like your Clantons, your amateurs that you would literally have not seen at the Players Championship before, but that kind of skill set should translate this week. And then we've got TPC River Highlands, which is a different agronomy wise. The agronomy at the Players Championship is a little bit different because it's overseed, but it's getting closer to the type of agronomy that we have this week. It's completely different at the Travelers. It's bent grass. It's that northeastern agronomy as opposed to that southern bent Bermuda grass, I should say. Shorter track, though, only 6,800 yards. And a lot of the same stats that we're looking at ball striking wise that week are what translate over to this event. You have, accuracy players at the top of the heap, also players from 125 to 175, which is why if you want to take a look at those leaderboards, it could also be a little bit helpful. But once again, and it's kind of a shame that all these events have a similar type of story here, it might not be the best field to comp to because it's a signature field event. So if you want to use that comp course history, it might be a little bit better to go back to before it became a signature event. I believe 2022 was the last year that it was a regular tour stop for some of those leaderboard poppers. Alrighty guys, that's all I've got for this week's course breakdown. Go ahead, smash that like button if you haven't already, and also comment down below what you've got as the winning score for a chance to earn a free month on my Patreon. And if you guys get the correct winning score and you're the first one to comment it, you will win a free month access there for all the projections, all the modeling that I'm doing week to week. It also includes all the Draftkings projections, my entire player poll for my 150 max, showdown for rounds 2 through 4, and all the underdog and prize pick stuff that I'm doing for rounds 1 through 4. So a whole bunch of extra content behind the paywall that you can get access to just by giving me that correct winning score. So go ahead, claim your score before anyone else steals it. Best of luck with the giveaway and also with all of your exposure this week, whether it's in those large field GPPs or out there with your outright betting exposure as well. I hope it's a good one before we get these FedEx Cup playoffs started, and we can have ourselves a good one and hopefully one into the profit at the same time. But that's all guys, best of luck. I appreciate your support in the channel as per usual. We're also going to have previews throughout the week, including our DFS and betting preview a little bit later on this evening, as well as our live streams Wednesday at 7 p.m. Eastern time. That'll be on the Ship It Nation YouTube channel. That'll be our DFS stream before lock, going over any DFS and fantasy questions that you've got for me. And then after that, we're going to be doing the prop side of things, the prop and betting stream at 8 p.m. Eastern time, and that'll be on my YouTube channel. So that's where the underdog and prize pick stuff will be going down. Also any matchups on the sports books and any of those last second questions that you've got for me as well. But a lot to come. Really looking forward to it. It's our last full event of the year. Let's take full advantage of that. So best of luck guys. I appreciate your support as I said, and to see you guys for the content later on this afternoon.